Greetings, my name is Allie and I'm here with another episode of Tarot for Geeks, a series that helps viewers learn tarot card meanings by pairing each card with similar characters from your favorite comics, games, movies, and TV. This all started as a personal project of mine where I was pulling the same card from each of my pop culture decks to see if I could extract any patterns that would help me get a deeper understanding of that particular tarot archetype. It's been a while since I've contributed anything to this project. I was on a bit of a hiatus. The whole thing got put on hold last year as other priorities took center stage, but I'm happy to be back and at it with today's episode all about the Magician. So let's start with the traditional Magician card. We have a seemingly young male figure with one arm raised and the other one pointing at the ground. In his raised hand, he has a wand that acts as a lightning rod for divine inspiration. The wand in his raised hand acts as a lightning rod for divine inspiration. That energy is channeled into consciousness and then manifests into the physical world through action and intention. So in other words, the Magician is a bridge between heaven and earth, taking power from the universe and channeling it through his body to take form in the physical world. The number 1 is the number of beginnings and potential. In front of him, resting on the table, are 4 objects that represent the 4 suits of the tarot, much like having all the aces actually, and a confirmation that all the necessary tools and resources are available and at his disposal. An alignment of heart, body, mind, and soul are necessary to reach his goal. The red roses and white lilies symbolize aspirations, the desire to bloom or bring something into fruition. They are the symbols of earth and his necessity to ground himself while connecting to the divine realm. He has the infinity symbol floating above his head and the Ouroboros, or the tail-eating snake, around his waist like a belt, and these are common symbols of wholeness, eternity, and things coming full circle. So in the Magician's case specifically, they represent consciousness of possibilities, along with an understanding that no matter what, he will be held accountable for his actions. The Magician is an archetype for divine, masculine, active energy. He understands that there is power in manipulating and changing one's environment, but also realizing that all actions have results and consequences. He has to be a skilled strategist. He is the ultimate achiever and is never afraid to act. He recognizes a need either in himself or for society and strives to meet that need with confidence and clear intentions. He never hesitates to do what is required to complete his objective. He knows what he wants, he knows his motives for wanting it, and he commits to that cause. He claims his power with awareness, focus, and by taking action. So some keywords that are associated with the Magician are taking action, doing what is needed or necessary, carrying out one's plans, making use of one's talents, skills, and abilities. The second one is acting consciously, so understanding your motives and intentions, making sure your objectives are clear, and knowing why things need to be done. So know your why. I don't know, you hear that in business a lot. Know your why, and then things will get easier. It's easier to make a business plan if you know why you're doing what you're doing. The third one, commitment, being goal-oriented, the ability to remove distractions, being ambitious, focused, and having strong willpower. Another keyword associated with the Magician is power. So the ability to make strong impacts, be energized, creative, and be a high achiever. Another major keyword of the Magician is manifestation. So seeing results and bringing ideas into reality. Now the darker side of the Magician includes words like illusion, trickery, manipulation, and cheating. Someone who will go to any length to see things through and believes that the ends justify the means, or that they lack morality or remorse. So just looking at all these pop culture Magician cards, right off the bat, there are a few patterns that emerge. So we see quite a lot of literal wizards. We have Constantine, Merlin, Gandalf, Harry Potter, Magnus Bane. So characters that literally have the ability to perform magic. But also, another thing that we see, another trend, are con artists, master manipulators, and tricksters. Some of these characters do both, some are one or the other. So I would like to start with Petyr Baelish, because I know he's not a favorite character, and some people might be wondering, what the heck is he doing as a magician? Well, like I just said, the whole con artist, master manipulator seems to be a trend among a few of these characters. So let me explain and argue why he is a very good archetypal magician. So Petyr Baelish, or Littlefinger, may seem like the odd one out. Not only is he kind of a villain, but he lacks any kind of magical or supernatural power, unless you count his superhuman ability to connive and manipulate people for his own advantage. He did, however, have clear intentions and motivations to seek wealth and power. He was an extremely clever strategist and never hesitated to take action towards his goals, even when his actions were unscrupulous. He is definitely credited with instigating the civil war that followed King Robert Baratheon's death, and he did this all so he could take advantage of the chaos and rise to power. He is a master manipulator and an arrogant trickster who exploited many of the Game of Thrones characters as pawns in his deviant schemes, making him a perfect example of the shadow side of the magician archetype. Now, let's put him aside, and I want to talk about Constantine, or Constantine. I know there's different ways of saying it. So John Constantine is my favorite representation of all the magicians here. Not only is he also a con artist and a stage magician, but he also descended from a long line of sorcerers with actual magical powers. He rarely uses these magical powers, however, choosing to rely mainly on his wits to outsmart his opponents instead. He is very confident in himself, his talents, skills, and abilities. He is well known for his sarcasm and profane cynicism. This chain-smoking adrenaline junkie is unquestionably a man of action and consciously chooses to live a life of danger. He has a wide circle of contacts in both the physical and spiritual planes. He makes friends easily, even though his dangerous lifestyle often gets those close to him killed. Despite being one of the good guys, he displays questionable morality at times, making deals with angels and demons alike to get himself both in and out of trouble. And I really love that spin on the magician with the one arm pointed to heaven and the other one pointed to hell. He puts himself in the middle, but most assuredly, he accepts accountability for all his actions. He's never looking for someone else to blame for his situations. He knows he gets himself into this, and because he's confident that he can get himself out. He has successfully cheated death and survived cancer as a result of his dealings and manipulative bargaining with supernatural entities. And he struggles to escape that influence of heaven and hell because he always owes someone something at all times, and he's constantly trading favors. He is strongly motivated to do something good in his life, maybe to redeem himself of his own guilty conscience. And he's also highly motivated to help humans take control of their destinies rather than leaving their fate in the hands of heaven or hell. Passivity is not his style by any means. So he is my personal favorite when it comes to the magician archetype. All right, let's go over here and talk about Harry Potter, because I think he is another kind of odd man out of this group of magicians. And the reason he seems out of place is that he's just a kid, and he lacks the age and experience of all these other dudes who are old, ancient, and many of them are even immortal. All these other guys have been around long enough to master their craft and become really good at what they do. Harry, on the other hand, is very new to magic. He really just learns that wizards even existed in the first place. But right off the bat, when he witnesses something that doesn't feel right to him, he assumes leadership and takes it upon himself to investigate and correct the situation. Even when he is afraid, he does his part without excuses. In this particular card, in the place of all the 4 suits, like in the regular magician, we see the table with the cups and the swords, the wands and the pentacles. In place of that, the artist has illustrated the 7 Horcruxes that he needs to complete his quest to rid the world of the evil wizard Voldemort. Now, despite his youth, he is extremely determined and strong-willed. He is committed to any task that aligns with his clear objectives and intentions. He puts himself on the front lines. He's very charismatic, brave, independent, and he never hesitates to ask for help when he needs it. And that's why he fits the magician archetype. Now, let's put all these guys aside for a sec and take a look at all these old gray bearded wizards. I'm going to move him. I'm going to come back to him later as well, and him too. He doesn't really count as an old gray bearded wizard, although is Ganondorf immortal? I'm not really sure. Maybe he fits, maybe he counts, but let's talk about these guys, because especially these 3, they kind of all fit that same stereotypical wizard profile. So up top, we have Mabrook. And Mabrook isn't really a major character in any sense. He doesn't get a lot of stage time in his story, and therefore we don't really know a whole lot about him. He's from the last Unicorn Tarot. But in his short scene that we do see of him, we find out that he is known as the Magician's Magician, and that he is the official magician of King Haggard's court. And so all of that little bit of information implies that he must be very talented and very powerful. So it makes sense that he was chosen for this card, for this deck, because of the limited number of characters in the story. We know Schmendrick, who's the main character magician of the story, doesn't really fit that magician profile. So it makes sense that they chose this really minor character for a major card. All we really see of him, his scene kind of plays out like this. He's summoned by the king and immediately gets fired, and he's rightfully insulted and angry about that after finding out right away that the incompetent Schmendrick is going to be his replacement. So he gets angry and he retaliates right away with a spell, and from that spell he discovers that Haggard the king, as he puts it, invited his own demise through his own front door. And so he takes a kind of vengeful pleasure in that knowledge and that premonition before he's escorted out of the castle. Visions of the future, although some of these magicians have that ability, isn't in the tarot sense a magician quality. That falls more under the job description of the high priestess. Magicians are more about creating the future they want rather than seeing the potential. They already believe they have the potential. They don't need to see the future. They make the future. Okay, Merlin. Merlin, this is from the Legend Arthurian Tarot. And because of his legendary status, Merlin often gets mistaken for an extremely powerful wizard because he's been around the longest. He's only the grandfather of all wizards in the sense that he likely inspired many of the fictional wizards that followed. He kind of set the standard for what an archetypal wizard should look like and what they can do. But the truth is that what impressed people in medieval times doesn't quite cut it for our modern wizards. So to clarify, just so you know which Merlin I'm talking about, I'm only talking about the classic Merlin from the medieval romances, not Merlin from the DC universe or any modern literary or cinematic reinvention of his character. Classic Merlin was really only known for two significant feats. One, he moved Stonehenge from Ireland to Britain to serve as a monument in memory of the victims of the Night of the Long Knives massacre. And two, he disguised Uther Pendragon as his enemy so he could father Arthur with his enemy's wife. So Merlin was a prophet with charisma and powers of persuasion. Truth be told, some stories portray him as a bit of a womanizer, so he had some persuasive power to sleep with all these women, but maybe he was more of a sexual predator. It depends on who's telling the story, but either way, that was his fatal flaw. It was Nimue, actually, one of his students and Lady of the Lake, who took him down in the end. In some stories, she was his lover. In other stories, she was proud to keep her virginity, unlike her fellow students of Merlin, who ended up going to bed with him. And she was not tolerating his advances or his shenanigans, and ultimately had him imprisoned for eternity. In some stories, they say it was a cave, in others it was a tree. But either way, he was never heard from again. So if we are looking at the worst possible version of Merlin, there was some feminist justice for you. A magician must be accountable for his actions. So he was a kingmaker. He set events in motion with his manipulations and acted counsel to King Arthur, counsel to Arthur's father Uther, as well as his uncle Aurelius Ambrosius, who was also a king. He had a major hand in raising Arthur and grooming him to become the king that he was. Over here, we have Gandalf the Grey, and like Merlin, Gandalf acts as a guide, offering wisdom and encouragement to the other characters in the story. He spends most of his time convincing others to do things, but when he fails to do that, he does not hesitate to take over and put himself on the front lines and get done what needs doing. So for example, when he fails to talk Denethor out of his despair and fatalistic funk, Gandalf takes over and leads Denethor's army to defend Minas Tirith. Likewise, as soon as he hears of Saruman's corruption, he takes action, escapes from prison, and when he confronts Saruman about it, he first offers him the opportunity for forgiveness and redemption, but when Saruman declines, Gandalf instantly strips him of all his powers, leaving him vulnerable to his angry servant, Grima Wormtongue. Gandalf is one of the ring bearers. He possesses Narya, the Ring of Fire, which gives him a lot of his power. And a lot of his power has to do with fire. So he can, in the story, you see him doing simple things like he can instantly light a campfire, and he puts on that spectacular fireworks display in the Shire. But then he also does sort of more badass things like blasting balls of light to repel the Nazgul and raining fireballs down on his enemies. His ability to wield the secret fire gave him that edge he needed to eventually defeat the Balrog. He was not a passive character that simply doled out unsolicited advice and then sat back hoping everyone did what they were told. He always stepped in, took action, and went wherever he was needed at that moment. Okay, here's another one of my personal favorite characters, Magnus Bane. So despite his youthful appearance, I know I said look at all these gray-bearded wizards, he doesn't really fit that profile, but he's actually centuries old. He is a warlock, which makes him immortal in the Shadowhunter universe, and an extremely powerful one at that. Likely due to his parentage, his father was Asmodeus, the Prince of Hell, a very high-ranking and powerful demon. In the Shadowhunter world, warlocks are hybrids of humans and demons. And so due to his age and experience, Magnus is very wise, very worldly. He's lived in many times in many places. He's well-traveled, multilingual, and he has triumphed over multiple heartaches. He's encountered racism, and he even suffered from parental abandonment. His mother committed suicide when she found out that he wasn't a human, but a warlock. So despite these tragedies that he faced in his life, he had a great sense of humor and a flamboyant fashion sense. He was very charismatic, outgoing, and a bit eccentric, and known to throw really great parties. He fits with the magician archetype in that he is extremely talented at what he does. He's a powerful figure who knows what he stands for and bridges the supernatural and physical worlds. He is extremely focused when committed to a task, and he has this great ability to drown out distractions. Like there might be a battle going on while he's trying to heal someone, and he's so focused on his healing spell that he can just keep doing what he's doing while the others are fighting demons and whatnot. He definitely acts consciously in that his intentions and motives are always clear, and he makes every decision knowing the potential risks, unlike many of the other characters who are more act now and think later. Alright, let's put these guys aside for a sec and bring out my remaining wizards, and I promise you I am almost done, because here are two more that sort of stand out as a bit of an exception. So here we have Patrick Jane from The Mentalist. This is from the TV series Tarot. And he also walks that line between the physical and spiritual worlds. Even though he admits to being a fraud, he had a successful career as a psychic medium, which I think counts as a supernatural power. He is exceptionally skilled and talented at cold reading, hypnosis, and he possesses great insight to the human psyche and behavior. He uses those talents that gave him his successful career as a medium to solve murders. His biggest motivation is to find the man that murdered his own wife and daughter. He knows exactly why he does what he does, and he's clear about his intentions and motives. Now, over here, much like Littlefinger, and maybe even more extreme, Ganondorf was a villain. So, he was the ultimate antagonist in the Legend of Zelda games. He is a sorcerer, he knows what he wants, power, and he will stop at nothing to get it. He has one arm raised with the symbol of the Triforce on his hand, a symbol for his lust for power, and one arm pointed down while he manipulates this puppet here, which is the King of Hyrule. So he's using his power to manipulate the physical realm. The Triforce is a symbol for his lust for power, and it's actually Zelda, Link, and Ganondorf combined that complete the Triforce, as they each represent wisdom, courage, and power respectively. Ganondorf is able to wield dark magic, like summoning dragons and monsters that terrorize Hyrule. He has the ability to transform into a boar-like creature. He has a demon form, and he is certainly not above cheating or manipulation. Like in the Ocarina of Time, he learns of Link and Zelda's plans early on, so he just sits back and lets them remove all the barriers to the Triforce so that he can swoop in at the last minute and just take it for himself. So maybe that's cheating, or maybe it's just clever strategy. Either way, those are both qualities of the magician. So now I'm gonna bring all my lovely magicians back, and I just want to talk about some other magicians in pop culture that don't show up in any of my tarot decks. All right, how's that look? Now, the first one I want to talk about is Doctor Strange, because he comes up all the time when I was doing my research. He's one of the first characters that gets mentioned, and he is a perfect example of the magician. So Dr. Stephen Strange is an arrogant, vain, and materialistic surgeon who loses his ability to operate after a car crash severely damages his hands. So he know from right in the beginning of his origin story that he is both talented and gifted. He becomes super tenacious about finding a cure. So when science fails him, he actually ends up turning to some mystical healing out of desperation. But he has very clear motives and intentions. He wants to heal his hands. So I see Doctor Strange as a perfect example of what it means to have a goal, but also being open to unexpected outcomes. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so let's use Doctor Strange as an example. When you're naming your goal or inquiring about somebody's goal, you'd say, okay, what do you want? Or you'd ask yourself, what do you want? What do you hope to achieve? What's your goal? And using Doctor Strange as the example, he would probably say, I want to heal my hands so I can perform surgery again. The follow-up question everyone should ask themselves is, and how would it make you feel to reach that goal? So how would it make you feel, Dr. Strange, to be able to perform surgery again? And he would probably say something like, well, if I could perform surgery again, I would have purpose again, I'd have pride in myself and my work, and I'd have, people would respect me, or he'd have his status back. Okay, so what you really want is to find purpose, be proud of your work, and be respected or have high status. So in his quest to heal his hands, which was his goal and motivation, what ends up happening to him is he becomes the sorcerer supreme and protector of the earth from mystical and magical threats. Not the outcome he was expecting, but he did find purpose, pride, respect, and high status. So, like the magician, Doctor Strange has tools and artifacts that give him more power, like his cloak of levitation and the Eye of Agamotto. He stands in the middle of the physical and spiritual realms, drawing powers from mystical entities and using that power to manipulate the physical world. Another character that I encountered on my research that came up multiple times, I've heard a few people suggest Zatanna as a magician archetype. So yes, she is a stage musician and she also has real magical powers. However, I still believe, when looking at all the characters from the DC universe, that Constantine makes the better magician in the context of the tarot. In my DC Justice League tarot deck, Zatanna is listed as the Queen of Wands, which is a really good fit in my humble opinion. I've always personally seen the Queen of Wands as a bit of a diva, someone who loves the spotlight, who's a stage performer like Zatanna, or who enjoys being the center of attention. So someone with flair who can put on a good show or throw a good party. My personal opinion, and it's just my personal opinion, you can disagree with me if you like, is that although Zatanna does have qualities of the magician, I believe she is a better fit for the Queen of Wands because of her confidence and showmanship. I think the creators of this deck got it right with their two choices, but I wanted to mention her because I know she does get multiple mentions out there as an example of a tarot magician that shows up in pop culture. Okay, so another magician, and I promise you this is the last one. We've probably mentioned every major wizard who exists in video games and comics and TV. But the last one I want to mention, because he came up multiple times, is Raceland Magier from the Dragonlance series by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. So, not being too familiar with those stories myself, I interviewed my husband, who is a big fan, to make sure I got some of these details right. So as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Raceland is a very goal-oriented wizard. He has high aspirations, and in the beginning of his story, he is driven to compensate for his fragile physique and his lack of brawny brute strength by learning the art of magic. He is focused, determined, and extremely talented. He was the youngest ever to successfully pass the wizard trials. He is selfish, sarcastic, and cynical. Sounds a little bit like Constantine, which can make him difficult to get along with, but his logic, reason, and skills as a strategist make him useful and persuasive. As he obtains more and more power, his goal becomes to defeat the evil Queen of Darkness, Takhisis. And once this becomes his main objective, he will use and manipulate anyone or anything that aids him in reaching that goal. His biggest lesson was learning how to be accountable for his actions, and that there can be huge costs associated with his desires. So he has to ask himself if what he really wants is really worth it. Okay, so now I want to do some comparisons, just like in my other episodes. So let's compare these two because they're side by side in the tarot and they're both right at the very beginning. So how are these cards related? Well, the two cards, as I said, they show up at the beginning, so therefore they represent new beginnings, where the Fool is an open book and ready for whatever comes his way. The Magician is focused and has clarity on what he wants and why he wants it. Now, the next cards, we had 0 and 1, now we have 1 and 2. Both of these two cards have a connection to the divine realm. So in the Magician, we see the hand up and the hand down, representing that channeling from heaven to this physical world. And in the High Priestess, we have the cross, which is the intersection of the divine and the physical world. Obviously, she is the feminine half and he is the masculine half. The High Priestess is about withdrawal and passivity, while the Magician is all about taking action. The Magician is about co-creating with spirit and drawing energy from supernatural forces and manipulating or manifesting results in the physical world, where the High Priestess is downloading messages or information from the spirit realm and then communicating them into the physical world. She works behind the scenes, whereas the Magician is out on the front lines. Now let's go to these two men. So we have the Magician and the Emperor. Now, although both men are seeking or have obtained some sort of power, the Magician is still looking out for number one and has little interest in taking on the responsibilities of anyone else but himself. The Emperor is a leader and has to consider the needs of many. So their relationship might be one where the Magician is an advisor or a close companion of the king. The Magician has the skills and wisdom that are useful to the Emperor, whereas the Emperor could be manipulated, or his power can be of assistance in helping the Magician gain what he wants. Okay, skipping to the next man in the tarot, we have the Hierophant. So another pair of figures who are both masculine this time and both have a spiritual connection. The Magician, again, one hand pointed to heaven, the other to earth. The Hierophant has two fingers pointed to heaven, and his other two, you can see with the gesture of his hand, the two fingers pointed down, pointed to earth. So both men are great. Their purpose is to take action in the world. The difference is in their motives. So the Hierophant takes action for a cause, a greater good. He wants to see change in the world or his environment. He takes a political or spiritual stance. So he's motivated by his beliefs in what society should be or what they deserve or something like that. The Magician is motivated and takes action for personal gain. Doesn't care what anyone else is doing or what's happening around him, as long as he gets what he wants. So it's funny now comparing the two, because I see, looking at all these other characters behind us here, that fits, like, it almost makes Gandalf the exception. And so that's why I want to talk about this character, because I feel there is a strong relationship between these two, being that, you know, he's looking out for number one, and the Hermit is often associated with being alone. And what is the difference or relationship between these two? Because I think there is a strong tie. When I'm teaching classes and workshops, I often refer to the Hermit as the old man wizard who's come to coach you or give you wisdom and advice. And yet many of the examples of the magicians I talked about are doing that very thing in their respective stories, like Merlin and like Gandalf, for example. So the Hermit even looks, for the most part, like our storybook wizards with the gray cloak and the long white beard. And so how do these figures differ archetypically? Now, the Magician shows up when you need to take action, when you need to have a plan, when you need to make use of your unique talents, skills, and abilities. it's time to acknowledge the fact that your goals will not come to fruition unless you are willing to work with them, because spirit, the powers that be, are only going to get you so far. So the opportunities can come to you, but you have to open the door and walk through it. That is the magician. The hermit is a counselor, and that counselor can and often does come in the form of your own inner voice or higher self. The hermit, in terms of a character or an archetype, has seen some things, he's been around, he's had experience, he's survived a life of action and adventure. So you can kind of think of him as a retired magician who is willing to take on an apprentice. He is the coach and personal advisor, much like some of these wizards here, like Mabruk and Gandalf and Merlin. Okay, let's just recap everything I've said. I'll try to summarize it in as succinctly as I can. The magician is someone who does what is needed, who steps up to the plate and stands on the front lines. He has great confidence in his abilities and makes use of his skills and talents, which leads him to achieve great things. He is committed and goal-oriented. He knows what he wants and why he wants it, and he prepares himself for the risks it will take to get it. He is ambitious, focused, and brave. He co-creates with supernatural entities to manifest his desires in the physical world. Joseph Campbell says, if you take one step towards the gods, they will take 10 steps towards you. The magician is a strategist, a planner, and possesses the power of persuasion. He knows he cannot do everything on his own, so he enlists the help of others either by negotiating mutually beneficial exchanges or by executing manipulation and trickery upon others. And those are my thoughts and observations of the Magician card. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you'll be notified as soon as the next episode is posted. I invite you to share your own thoughts and any observations I may have missed. I think I named every major wizard that exists. I may have gone a little overboard this time, but if I missed one, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay shiny and keep sparkling. Bye for now.